welcome to everyone in this room and online. We are sitting here actually for our second joint seminar, which is between the Multicultural Center in Kraków and the Multiculturalism and Migration Observatory that is run out of the Economics University in Kraków. And we would like to very warmly thank our hosts here today. We're on Daszyńskiego 16, which is in Polish, the Fundacja Małopolskiej Izby Samorządowej, which I have loosely translated as the foundation of the Małopolska Chamber for Regional Government. But please don't quote me on that one. Thank you very much to our hosts. My name is Karolina Czerska-Shaw. I will be the moderator for today's session on behalf of the Multicultural Center in Kraków. So today, before I present our guests, we will be discussing the preliminary results of a research conducted jointly by the Multiculturalism and Migration Observatory at the Economics University. That is also the Center for Advanced Studies and Population at the Economics University, Population and Religion, I'm sorry, in collaboration with the University of Vienna and the Multicultural Center in Kraków. And the topic, as you may very well know, is the salient one on refugees from Ukraine in Kraków. So it's my pleasure to present to you three of our guests today who will be talking about again, the results of this really important research. So I will go from my left here. I have next to me Olena Nahorniuk, who is an economist who has worked for many years at the Kiev University of Trade and Economics and the National University, teaching financial and investment management. Welcome, Olena. Next to Olena is Jan Brzozowski. He is Associate Professor and Head of the Department of European Studies and Economic Integration at the Economics University in Kraków. And a member of the Committee of Migration Research at the Polish Academy of Sciences. Welcome, Jan. And next to Jan is Konrad Pędziwiatr. He is a professor at the Economics University in Kraków, and he is the initiator and coordinator of the Multiculturalism and Migration Observatory at the said university. Also associated with the Center of the Advanced Studies on Population and Religion. We welcome all three of you here today, and what I'd like to do is give you the floor to present your preliminary findings, after which we will open up the room to discussion and questions, as well as questions from the Zoom. If you'd like to put your questions in chat, we will be following that. And I assume we also have the possibility to listen to your questions if you'd like to speak up over Zoom as well. So without further ado, I will give the floor, I think, Konrad, to you, if you'd like to start. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and the hosts for having us here, and for all the participants of the seminar. What we want to do is to share with you some of the preliminary findings on our quantitative survey on refugees from Ukraine in Kraków. The research which we carried out together with Jan and Olena, and also with four other persons, some of whom or have a status of refugees who are helping us out to carry out this research. And on the first slides, actually, you can see one of the areas where we were carrying out this research, which is UNHCR and PESEL registration place in Kraków, located at the Tauron Arena. And I put also on the first slide the very first sort of place where refugees were coming to Kraków. This is the railway station. This is the old part of the railway station where a significant number of people were staying on the way further or while searching for accommodation in Kraków. So I will start with some introductory remarks and tell you a little bit about refugees in Poland and Kraków, just to sort of paint a larger picture of the situation of refugees in the city. And then we will go to talk to you about the methodology of our research and also the select. So I'll start from this general picture, which is showing the situation of Ukrainian refugees in Poland and in Kraków, as we are most interested in Kraków. So as for today, we know that there are 1,200,020 Ukrainians who registered for PESEL. So basically the situation is that Poland became a very rapidly country of hosting one of the largest refugee populations in the world, and some of the big data say that that this is almost over 2 million people. The big data suggests that, but we know that it's from the registration, PESEL registration is 1,200,000. And when it comes to the region that we are focusing on, Małopolska region is 120,000 people as for yesterday, and the number of persons who registered for temporary protection PESEL in Kraków is almost 32,000. A very small change in the last weeks. I was updating data from last month, and it was almost only minimal change. And when it comes to larger powiat, larger Kraków is over 15,000, and you have also a breakdown gender, and so you can see that the vast majority of these registered persons are women, and obviously the more detailed analysis of this registration data will show you that, especially among the males, are male children, and that's why it's already sort of a remark important to understand why in our sample we had so vast majority of women and a few men. We were obviously targeting people, adults, so the youngsters were not in this group. So the registered data and existing data give us a lot of information, but they do not. They don't provide us detailed information about the refugee population in the city. So, for example, this Union of Polish Metropolis, they did this very excellent research on big data showing the stock of migrants, but we know very little about the reception conditions and integration of situations of refugees, and that was our goal to get to know them better. And in collaboration, as it was mentioned, with the University of Vienna, we decided to carry out a survey. It's very important because the situation is sort of very much fluid. So it's very important that to state clearly when this research was carried out between the beginning of May and mid-June. And we were carrying out a survey with the help of our assistant researchers, some of whom, as I said, were refugees in various locations in the city of Kraków. And then what is important, moving and some of these places were such as the registration places in Tauron Arena that were shown at the very first slides, and but also here on Daszyńskiego, where we see even from the window of the place where we have this seminar, refugees help queuing up for help in some of the assistant places in support centers and multicultural center on Daszyńskiego. So these were important places for collecting the data. And the questionnaires we had printed in Russian and Ukrainian, and as you can, and we've 45% of them were filled in Russian language and 55 in Ukrainian language. As far as the sample is concerned, the vast majority of people that we have interviewed that filled the survey were women, 95%, 5% other males, and other not specified. When it comes to the structure, the age structure, the majority of people were between the age of 40 and 46. These were the larger cohorts. And when it comes to the country of birth, they were usually born in Ukraine, some in Russia, in other European countries. And we also looked at the religious affiliation, and the religious affiliation was such that the Orthodox Church was the 3/4 of the respondents belonged to the Orthodox Church or specified it as a religious affiliation. 9% belonged to the Greek Catholic Church, 7% to non-religion, and then the rest were other types of faiths. We could see a very important presence and importance of religious networks in the process of reception and at the moment in the process of integration. When it comes to the places of origin of Ukrainian refugees, the most popular, the largest capital city and eastern regions kind of stood up in our sample. The largest number of people came from these areas, and also we can understand these were some of the areas, especially at the beginning, very strongly sort of affected by the ongoing war. And one of the very interesting research findings, which we'll talk more about it in a minute more, is the usage of languages. And we've asked several questions about the language which they use in everyday life and which they know. And interestingly, in this time when we're carrying this research, we found that everyday use language was almost 50% Ukrainian, but 30% of people used Russian and further almost 12% used interchangeably Ukrainian and Russian. And my reading of this finding is such that people from Eastern regions that in the past used to use mostly Russian language started to use Ukrainian language, and it's a dynamic process of ethnic crystallization. I believe is ongoing, and the usage of Ukrainian language, especially among persons who in the past were using Russian language. And now I pass to Elena, who will shed more light on labor market and also on the reception and integration sort of analysis.
Okay, thank you so much. Labor market, a few words about labor market, because it's, I think, Jan will concentrate on this question more detailed.
Okay, in Zoom. If we can ask, okay, if you can hear us well on Zoom. So maybe just the microphone.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah.
Okay. So we asked people about if they were attended to the labor market in Ukraine, and they asked mostly yes, they were attended to the labor market. They have had some jobs, and they're mostly it's those people who had a job in such economic sectors as trade and services in Ukraine, also in education and financial sectors, and healthcare. Their occupation mostly are sales, teachers, accountants, managers, and about 30% of respondents didn't give an answer on these questions. People mostly spend more than 60 hours per week for their jobs, working hours. I think maybe I will give the word to you, Jan, and then I will continue about another questions.
Yeah, so basically, this is the constant struggle with refugee populations. They are in a kind of limbo between decision to either settle permanently or return. In our case, we basically can see that most of migrants, actually, most of refugees in our sample are mind to stay in Poland. They have also the strategy that is dominant among them is to take some occupation. So the strategy, wait and see what happens, and living from savings and limited allowances and social benefits is visible, but it's not the dominant one. And it is also interesting to see that in spite of the fact that we already know that Ukrainians in Poland do not face many problems with daily communication, so the Ukrainian language is quite culturally proximate to Polish one. Most of our respondents plan to learn Polish or already are learning Polish language. Basically, 3/4 of the sample of the respondents are striving to learn the Polish language, which additionally, of course, enhances the perspectives of labor market participation, but also this is in a way an explanation why these people decide to stay in Poland, because learning Polish language is probably the most natural thing to do. While when we ask them about other language, foreign language competences, the share of those who spoke any other foreign language apart from Polish or Russian was very limited. So, for instance, only 1/3 spoke at least some English. So that in principle means that, for instance, moving to Germany, in which access to labor market is very much conditioned on the ability to speak at least some German, is very, very limited. So that's why only 6% of our respondents actually expressed will to move elsewhere, apart from the obvious response, wait here until it's possible to return to Ukraine. Of course, as we already mentioned, the majority of our respondents were females with children. Actually, more than 3/4 of them, 78% had at least one child, and most of these children, of course, moved with our respondents to Poland. But the dominant model is more or less like in Poland. So the vast majority of respondents had only either one or two children. So when it comes to this big discussion how possible inflow of refugees could save our demography, we could say easily that it's not a major change, because also in terms of fertility rate in Ukraine is even lower than in Poland, and this is reflected also in our sample. What is really positive when it comes to the possible success of the, let's say, adaptation of refugees in Poland is a relatively high and quite satisfactory level of self-reported health condition. This is something that in the literature is pointed as one of the big problems with refugees, both in terms of mental but also physical health. And in our case, respondents were rather positive in this aspect. So this is really something a bit surprising in a positive way. The refugees were rather confident about their health condition, both mental and physical. Also, let's say, enthusiastic reception, or rather picture of enthusiastic reception of refugees in Poland, which was mostly present in media discourse, is somehow reflected in our survey, because 80% of our respondents felt that they felt really welcome when they arrived to Poland by both public authorities, but mostly by normal people, hosted them, offered them support, mostly the NGOs said mostly welcome. So also gave a positive answer. Actually, very few of them complained about bad reception. And it is also important to say, and this is one of the most important differentiations between for instance, the current refugee crisis and, let's say, Syrian refugee crisis from a few years ago, that actually lots of respondents indicated that they have at least some migrant networks already existing. So this is very important because we in Migration and Multicultural Observatory for several years have investigated the integration practices of Ukrainians in Kraków and Małopolska, and we know very well that this economic migration is extremely well integrated, and these are the advocates for the accommodation of their brothers and sisters, the Ukrainian friends who arrived here as refugees. So these people do not arrive alone, they have some support structures, and this is something that is very important. Of course, this is also visible when it comes to accommodation, but also in many other spheres of their social activity here. Have either friends or family members in Poland. So this is really something that makes a difference in terms of the successful adaptation in Poland. Of course, we are using the term adaptation because it's way too early to talk about any integration. Yes. It is also important to mention that this relatively low, because some 1/3 of the respondents were working already at the moment when we said that they actually should be perceived as a positive issue anyway, because we have to remember that vast majority of our respondents are women with small children, so their possibility to undertake full-scale employment is limited. Plus, and this is data, this is information we have from the former occupation, that in many cases these were quite traditional families in which males took the major responsibility for providing income to family. So only 53% actually of our respondents were economically active in Ukraine. But when looking at their profile, it is also very interesting to see, and this is something which also opens kind of possibility of very successful adaptation here in Poland, that actually a considerable share, 11% of our respondents were entrepreneurs in Ukraine. This is something which is quite new, because when we look at the Ukrainian, mostly economic migrant population in Poland, the entrepreneurial rate among Ukrainians is relatively limited. So these new migrants, of course, forced migrants, refugees, apparently have much more entrepreneurial spirit, and this can be actually, if of course we create favorable conditions for them, this would be an opportunity also for Poland, because this would enhance the creation of new ventures, new firms. Also, it is very important to say that the population of refugees is extremely well educated. So more than half of respondents is tertiary educated. 56% has either bachelor or master diploma, and additional 2% have a PhD. So this is really, on one hand, this says that we have fantastic human potential here in Poland, but of course this creates a huge challenge of matching those people with right employment, so to avoid brain waste. Yeah, and we also mentioned already, and so I don't want to repeat it, that they are actively looking for a job, but of course the big challenge for our respondents was to balance employment opportunities with taking care of children. So of course this is another important challenge for public administration, especially at the municipal level, to guarantee places in schools and preschools for refugee children, which already was taking place, but of course in the longer run, also for the next schooling year. And just from my side, the last remark, of course, we know pretty well, and even now there are some legal initiatives in Polish Parliament. The big challenge is the housing, yes, because in our sample, more than 20%, let's say 1/5 of respondents lived in temporary refuge centers. Of course, fantastic that these refugee centers have been created, but we know it from the literature, from other studies of entrepreneurs, that this situation cannot be sustained for a long time, because this is a situation in which normal life cannot be fully carried out. This is a situation connected also with stress, so these people need desperately to have more independent housing. And of course, this is a huge challenge for Poland and for Kraków in particular. We are not coming here with any solutions. We are just saying that this is something that in a long run, in upcoming months, will be the major challenge. And hopefully the politicians will come up with solutions that, for instance, like voluntary resettlement to smaller cities, to some larger cities which have experienced in the recent decades of transformation, serious population decline, and have a relatively large pool of social housing at the disposal. This might be some options that could help to solve this problem.
And I would like to focus on another questions about forms of help received and types and scales of problems faced by Ukrainians. First of all, maybe it would be better to consider types and scales of problems as people considered them on May, when the surveys took place. The biggest problem they mentioned that it was access to the labor market. I will not repeat those thoughts that Yannick underlined, but it was it is the biggest type of the problem, and the second one is access to the accommodation. So it's basic needs people would like to satisfy, to have the condition to stay here, and women with children. And the third by the scale is access to the financial support. Then the next, how people considering the forms and sources of receiving the help to them. most significant forms of help are place to stay or sleep and material support. But as I mentioned before, the biggest problem is the labor market, how people can reach the labor market. So they didn't mention that they received such help like access to the labor market. Only some of them in surveys. I think this is the moment that should have some attention. And also, one of the most significant forms of help people received, it was information, place to stay, material support, and information. Also, help with transportation. Transportation, like the arriving from the border to the certain places in Poland, and also municipal transport. Some people paid attention that they are very so grateful because they had this opportunity to have the municipal transport for free about 3 months in Poland, like in other countries. It was very important form of help received. Who offered this help? The vast majority of respondents said that they received this help from locals and also from relatives and friends. Relatives and friends, because it's related to the question why these people came to the Poland, because most of them have some friends, some relations, and it's not only those places to sleep or to stay that was proposed by just by Polish people on railway station, also by those who are friends or relatives. Also significant part of this help was received by from local humanitarian organizations and religion institutions, as people underlined or focused on this question. I think that's all. Thank you.
I'll start from where Jan left, namely the situation about the housing. Just to stress even stronger the importance of solutions. As you know, at the moment, refugees from Ukraine are entitled to indirectly to housing help through Polish families, to the program of 40+. This program is at the moment set to run for 120 days, depending obviously from when people came, but in many cases this help is ending or already ended if someone came at the very beginning of March or the end of February, which means that a significant number of people who are in someone else's houses. So here you can see them. I live with someone else free of charge. This free of charge is partially supported by this 40+ program, which will and this will put the largest number of people in the crisis sort of situation. Our findings show also that a significant number of Ukrainians do not need help, and they live in rented houses, flats, and rooms. But obviously here is one of the critical also areas where you could see that they find it as most critical element of help in a way, and the access to the housing market is the most difficult one. And other research also experiences people searching for housing, the very rapid growth of prices. All of these issues are very much there and in our findings. We've also had a set of questions about sort of political issues, feelings about democracy, EU, NATO, and safety. And as you can see on these slides, the assessment of democracy as a way of governing Ukraine was very positive. Most of the respondents have viewed it as good or rather good, and they express a lot of trust in the European Union. This was carried out at the moment when Ukraine was being invited to become a candidate country, which is formally now. It's very important. So you can see the reciprocity in this trust in some way. We asked about the feelings of safety from various sort of perspectives, and also from the sort of perspective of the country, and how do they feel in Poland. They feel in Poland as a NATO member. And as you can see, people, the vast majority, over 80%, said yes or yes very much, which proves that in a way the main rationale for moving out of the country. We need to not remember about this. I didn't say it probably at the beginning. You need to remember that before this stage of the war started in February, there was 1.5 million internally displaced persons in Ukraine before the war, since 2014. And some of the people who are now out of the country are, in a way, twice displaced people, twice refugees, we could say. Almost, according to the latest UNHCR data, almost 6.5 million people are internally displaced, and over 5 million people left the country. And those people who left the country usually are those who have social networks and some cultural capital as well, who were able to make this decision to move out of the country. We also asked about the intervention. As you can see, 60% of people almost said that they want NATO to intervene immediately. And we had several other options in these questions. Basically, these options are so-called red lines in international politics, as is always stated. So, as we know, in the Syrian war, these red lines didn't work out because the chemical weapons were being used, and yet the war against Bashar al-Assad and the warning that Obama made didn't take place, and nothing happened. So here you can see that the feelings among the refugees is such that NATO should intervene immediately. And the big question which is being asked all the time is, especially in Poland, but also elsewhere, is whether Ukrainians return. And at the moment, because I think it is super important to stress the moment when this research was carried out, and the situation is fluid and changes from one month to another, is that At the moment when we carried out the research, half of the respondents said that they don't know if they want to stay in Poland or no, which is, I believe, a very reasonable, rational answer in the current situation. But some of them openly said that they want to stay in Poland, and some of them also already sort of made their mind, and they said they knew that they don't want to stay in Poland. And interestingly, and these are, I believe, some of the people who are returning now, that 1/3 of Ukrainians want to go back when the war is over, but 15% consider to go back to the country yet before the war. So now we've heard a lot information about Ukrainians going back, and our findings prove it, that this is happening, that some people, in spite of the ongoing war and the bombardment of not only places close to the front line in the eastern part of Ukraine, but as you know, in Kherson today, in Kharkiv, and on a daily basis in various locations outside, far away from the front, are being struck by Russian bombs. So, but in spite of this, 50% of people want to go back. And here I want to also, at the very last point I want to make to move to Q&A, is to show you some results from a different research which we were carrying out with colleagues at Center for Migration Research in Warsaw within the Respond project, which was a big quantitative research as well on Syrians in Turkey and Sweden. And one of the interesting questions we were asking in this research was a question about the return. And here, the cafeteria is almost similar, because when we were designing our questionnaire, I looked at various types of research, and one of the research I was looking at was this one, and in a way adopted when designing our questionnaire, I looked and wanted to have it comparative with this response research. And the only difference here is the regime change here. There was no regime change in Ukraine, which luckily there was no regime change, because if there was a regime change, the answers would be different and could be similar to those. But what is striking in this findings is that some people, and you need to know, this is 2020, the war in Syria started 9 years earlier. 9, 8, depending, obviously people were living in different, it wasn't en masse as it is now the case, one time sort of a vast sort of outflow, but it was more spread into phases, so people were living in different moments, but yet several years after they left, almost half of them, 45% in Turkey and 47% in Syria, said they never think of returning to Syria. Why so? Because there was the regime change, and because of the passage of time and the integration processes that have started so importantly. And interestingly, you could say that this relates to Turkish situation, to Turkey, which is super close, and you could think that, well, there will be many more people willing to return, but no. And similarly to Sweden. Here it changes with different answers, but the longer the war is ongoing, the more brutal it is, the more devastation of infrastructure and housing and economy, obviously then the likelihood of return becomes smaller, and then the Ukrainian answers will increasingly look like those of Syrians with the passage of time. This is my hypothesis, which obviously needs to be tested. So to conclude, The Russian invasion on Ukraine has led to unprecedented migration and humanitarian crisis in Central and Eastern Europe. Poland, and obviously in particular major Polish big cities, face numerous challenges while trying to accommodate various needs of refugees from Ukraine, because the big cities were most those that received the largest number of Ukrainian refugees. Our research, we believe, answers some of the key questions which are being asked about the current situation of Ukrainians in Poland, and especially in Kraków. They most squarely are about the situation of Ukrainians in Kraków, but Kraków as such is not so super specific to other areas in the city, in Poland. So we believe that a significant number of findings can be in a way extrapolated with some caution to other places in the country. And we see also emerging now the Union of Metropolis will soon issue a new type of research, and they've also carried out research, quantitative research, which I believe it will be interesting to compare with our findings and to search for commonalities. What is important, the last point, is that the local integration policies, because we need to talk about integration policies at the moment, not about the reception. The reception phase is in a way over, and we need to think critically how to address various issues of integration of Ukrainian refugees in Poland, and these policies should take into account the results of such emerging research such as ours. Thank you very much for your attention, and we are open for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Olena, Jan, and Konrad, for a very comprehensive look at your research, your preliminary research findings. I would like to now open up the floor to discussion and questions from the table here, as well as those of you who are joining us online. If you want to raise your hand or just put it into chat your questions, we will be taking them as they come. I have a few of my own, but I will hold on to those for the end. And I see that already there are a few here. If you want to, if you would like, you can introduce yourself or not and ask your questions.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm Tamar Jacoby. I'm a visiting American, and I've been here since early March. Also had a project interviewing refugees. I have one factual question, a discrepancy I thought I heard, maybe it was English issues. I thought that you said a majority were working at home, and you made it sound like it was only about half. And I mean, maybe that's consistent, but were most of them working at home or in Ukraine, or were they not working? That's a factual question. Then I have a larger question. Did we ask about the men at home? Because your comparison of the Syrians and the Ukrainians, I don't think most of the Syrians were women who had left men, and surely that's going to be a huge factor in that return calculus. So factual question.
Maybe I will start. I will explain, because when we asked about having to part in the labor market, some people put the answer no, but then they answered. They put an answer about those sector of economy where they had a job. I think maybe people meant that before leaving Ukraine, they were not they were having a job in some reasons just before leaving, but in general they took part in the labor market some way.
When it comes to that's why our research is preliminary, because we had actually conducted a household survey. So there were questions about the entire family staying here and those who were left behind. So obviously, yeah, so the picture is basically 80% of the partners stayed in Ukraine, while some 20% of the male partners are here, and most of these actually have arrived before. Yeah? So they were economic migrants who simply did not return, although there is, of course, a vast group which decided to move and fight for the country. Some of them stayed, and their female partners joined them.
Yeah, there's some data also from the ministry saying that 250,000 refugees entered the labor market in some form or another and gained access to jobs. So in a way, our research supports this, showing a very strong willingness to join the labor market. But obviously, this is mitigated by the possibilities of finding care for children, for example. And this is one of the critical elements, areas in Poland, the access to care, because it is not sufficient even for Poles before pre-war. So access to care, especially kindergartens and schools, will become a big issue. So I keep stressing the moment, because I believe if someone, me or someone else, carries this research in September, October, the picture will be different, because then the access to the education will become critical, because this will be also the moment for the key educational decisions to make, whether the children will continue online from Ukraine, whether the Polish schools will adapt. And to be honest, we don't know. And the city doesn't know as well. So it is because the ministry is not making it blatantly clear, like what is the policy and how are we preparing for the return of Ukrainian children to Polish schools. It was done ad hoc when they came, and quite successfully, although we know that only a minority of children actually went to Polish schools, and this was already very difficult in some places, big cities, because the classes were enlarged. And we know from our research, which we carry out, pick up some of the reports which I've got here, which we showed that, for example, there was that the number of foreigners in the schools in Kraków doubled within a month, which was unprecedented, never happened. And obviously this was through enlarging the classes and welcoming Ukrainian children to Polish schools. But this was done at a very ad hoc basis, and I think this would be one of the big issues in September, especially.
That 250,000 that have entered the labor market, that's out of 2 million?
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah.
I would say rather out of those 1.2 million who got pesos.
Yeah.
I see that we have a question from Zoom, Brett Oslard. You can unmute yourself if you can. Can we unmute Brett?
Yes, thank you. I was quite interested in the community connectedness aspects that you addressed there, and now something around about 30% of people had existing connections, but in my experiences volunteering since the start up until Corpus Christi, when I unfortunately had to return to Australia, there really wasn't any community connectedness, and you've got a bunch of people from the second largest European country coming to cities, and they're coming displaced from all over the place. So really what I saw and what in my discussions with people was there was no real community connectedness. And one of your colleagues just really nailed it on the head before by saying that it was an ad hoc approach to education, but it's an ad hoc approach to many other areas. And if you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're only really touching on the base level and not the next levels up in building that community. So Is there any other aspects from that research that you can tap into or comment on in terms of community building?
Yeah, first of all, of course, not all of them have networks. Yes, that's important. Around half of them had somebody in Poland who helped them, but so this is the first issue. Of course, lots of people who were displaced from cities like Kherson or farther to the east in Donetsk, they didn't have, because from these regions, the economic migration to Poland was rather marginal. So obviously these people were lacking some social capital here in Poland. But what is also very important to see, and this is what we are witnessing from the very beginning of the war, is that also this Ukrainian diaspora is taking a very active role in supporting Ukrainian refugees. So it's in various instances, it's simply we know it also from the perspective of charity organizations. Sometimes it's better to simply give especially when lots of my friends, researchers from other countries were asking how to help Ukrainians. I was preferring to give them the links to Ukrainian organizations who were not only targeting the support to Ukraine, but also to Ukrainians here in Poland, Ukrainian refugees. So this is something that is definitely changing, because before the war, these Ukrainian organizations, of course, existed, but they were mostly focused on very selected areas of activity, some of them cultural, but for instance, this economic support was not so popular. Now we can even see the evolution of some organizations which initially were founded for one specific purpose, and now they are thriving and expanding, doing fantastic things. For instance, organizing, this is something that I never thought of. So for instance, support for terminally ill children, so hospitia. This is something that we haven't thought of. I'm also a member of charity organization, but we lost from our eyesight this need, yes? And this specific organization was exactly targeting those specific people in need. So, and this is something that is really evolving. So they really feel, I mean, the economic migrants who are already well established in Poland, that they have some kind of obligations, moral obligations towards the Ukrainian refugees, and they are really willing to offer the support. Yes, of course. So yeah, this is the positive side. Of course, there might be some potential conflicts, especially this issue over the language, because these organizations try to advocate that Ukrainian language should be the language spoken. But I think this, as we have already shown in our data, really most of the refugees speak at least some Ukrainian, and this is changing. Yeah? The preference of the Ukrainian language is also visible among the refugee population in Poland. So yeah, I would say it's these two groups. They are interconnected. There is a kind of bond between them. Konrad, maybe.
Yeah, I think yeah, it is very important to take into account the pre-war sort of pre-2020 war. The war in a way started to make Poland an immigration country. From 2014 onwards, we see increasing number of immigrants and decreasing number of emigrants from Poland. But this new phase obviously changed Poland radically and made Poland a country which has a very mixed type of migrants and turned Poland into one of the countries with some of the largest refugee populations. So this pre-war, pre-invasion, let's say, to more precise situations, was important because the diasporic networks and links, in a way, were activated at the moment when needed. I think Olena could say about her links with Polish colleagues, the university, which I believe were not super strong, but at the moment when it was necessary, sort of these links were possibly sort of activated. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's my case because I have no friends, I have no relatives here in Poland, but when I arrived, I called to my colleague from Kraków University, and he really became a good friend here in these mountains. So it's my specific case.
Yeah. So in a way, just to say that it doesn't need to be like a very strong sort of connection. It could be super loose, that you just know someone somewhere, huh? Or that a Polish academic came to your university and you met him there or whatever, and then you have this loose connection. I remember before I had a chat and there was a very good seminar organized by Center for Migration Research in Warsaw with Frank Duvel, who was at the very beginning of this invasion. He was suggesting that Germany can expect at least around 1 million refugees on the basis of the current sort of economic migrants population. So he looked at it like that you have to multiply it by these 3 or 4 the existing community, and I believe this is also the case in Poland. I think there would be more people in Poland. I could make this statement if the reception center, if the reception conditions from the economic perspective were more were better in a way, because at the moment, as you know, the Ukrainian refugees are entitled to some forms of financial help, but only, for example, if they have small children. And if they have older children, they are not entitled to any help. And or if they are arriving without children, then they have to immediately search for jobs and integrate in the labor market, access the labor market, because there is no help. There is some logic behind it, but at the same time, as you know, people who are in the, if we compare the temporary protection sort of situation with the asylum procedures, in the asylum procedures, the state needs to provide housing and financial sort of accommodation, food, everything. In a way, it is of the quality. We can discuss this obviously, but it is in a way covered. And if you do not use, for example, the one of the refugee centers, which the vast majority of people in recent years decided to opt out, then they are entitled to housing allowance. And this is not happening when it comes to Ukrainian refugees. People have no access to housing allowance. The housing allowance is only being given for a limited amount of time and only to Polish citizens who are hosting Ukraine. So the system, I believe, is designed in such a way that it gives people only one option, which is you go either the classic integration option for Ukrainians in Poland pre-invasion, so labor markets, or in a way pushes people out of the country for better living conditions. So I think this may explain, and just to tell you, when we had this presentation 2 weeks ago, or in Katowice, I spoke to the UNHCR representative who was telling me that they want their cash benefits. I was thinking whether putting the slide or not, decided not to do it. But as you know, the only financial benefit that the Ukrainians are entitled to is the UNHCR cash benefit. And the UNHCR representative told me in a private discussion that they want to stop giving this in Poland, and they want the state to take over, and they want the state to provide people with this cash benefit. And I don't see this happening. As we know, this is very insufficient. When I last time looked at the data, there was hardly more than 100,000 people that were registered for cash benefits. Probably the latest data, maybe better, is slightly higher, but still we know that 10 times more people register for PESO. So there should be many more people, and we know how inefficient they were, especially in the first weeks with this registration. And it's still, there is 500,000. I was reading today in Ukraine, but obviously the numbers are higher there. But still, this will be crucial. This will be critical. To what extent, how the Ukrainian refugees will have access to financial help, so as they will be able to go to shop and buy things themselves and not to queue up in front of support centers on Daszyńskiego. Because if they were provided with financial means, they wouldn't need to come here. They would be able to do it themselves, and that's this would be critical. Some of the critical elements, and this is beyond the sort of city policy. It is a state policy in that way, but this state policy has a huge influence on personal decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hello everyone, I'm Anna Strama. Thank you so much for the research. I mean, I think it's very important and like absolutely necessary if we are planning what do we want to do next in the future and how to prepare ourselves. So again, thanks a lot. And okay, so I work for the Halinaniec Legal Aid Center and for the Migrant Info Point. So this is why for me what was interesting is the information about the people's access to legal help and information. So you said that 40% of people got access to information, 70% to legal aid. And since I am not a scholar, I don't know if I am to be happy or not about this. I mean, did you ask if people had problems with accessing either information or legal aid? And if so, what were the obstacles in accessing those kind of services? So this would be my main question, I guess. And about what we've discussed just now, like I fully agree with you when it comes to housing and when it comes to education and how the access to schools will influence mothers' ability to join the labor market. And I was wondering if, I mean, this is a very difficult question. I don't know if anyone is able to answer it, but if people soon are put in a situation when they have no place to stay, when they have no possibility to get a job. So for example, would they be more willing to go to the Western countries, as Poland has the tradition of being a transit country? Or for example, people do consider going back, even if this means risking their lives or their families' lives. So that would be my second question. Thank you.
I can answer to the second one. Definitely, the move to the west among our respondents is not at least in the declarations, is not something very common. But yes, definitely coming back to Ukraine even if situation is not fully stable, is all considered as an option. And also, probably all of us have among our closest circle the same problem, so the same struggles. Yes, some of our friends already consider homecoming, yes, return to, especially that some parts of Ukraine are relatively stable, for instance, Kiev, yes, which is also in our sample is maybe not the dominant region, Kiev and Kiev Oblast, but let's say some 30%, yeah, 25 or something, coming from this region. So for them, obviously, this is a reasonable option. Yes, they, of course, also the Ukrainian males cannot leave the country. So the question of being together is also a natural thing and natural reason why they, in spite of the threat and still not full guarantee of personal security, they want to be scared and come back. So rather, I would say, coming back to Ukraine, then moving more to the West. This is the...
Yeah, just to add to this, when it comes to the plans, our research shows that a lot of people don't know, but those who think already about migration, they think about such countries with Ukrainian diaspora, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Great Britain, 2% of people in Great Britain, and also other non-European countries. And here, above all, Canada and US. And these are very important places. We had at the very just 2 months or 3 months ago, the beginning of the invasion, we had a very interesting seminar with a Mexican researcher who was telling us before the Guardian and other articles started to emerge about Mexico as a gateway for Ukrainians to US. She was telling us about the situation in Mexico at the Mexico City and how Ukrainians are arriving in large numbers and accessing, because there was a window of opportunity when the Ukrainians accessing the US didn't need any visas really and any paperwork, and this window of opportunity is closed now, so there is a smaller number of people going through Mexico, but still it is very important through the sponsorship programs, especially in Canada and US, to migrate to these countries. When it comes to your question concerning legal situation, the main goal of our research was to search for these problematic areas in a way. And now we have 2 other teams that are working qualitatively to try to get the answers and try to figure it out on the basis also of this research about what are the issues in a way when it comes to access to legal aid and to other things, so access to housing and other things. So I believe that the key problem with the legal situation was that, especially at the beginning, before the passage of the bill, was what is our status and the temporary protection measures. My question would be rather, this big question is when the temporary protection will stop being temporary protection. The temporary protection cannot go forever. It was starting this big discussion ongoing about the future of this status and how this legal status and to what extent it is fair to different types of refugees as well, and so on. There are many ongoing discussions, but this temporality obviously is every day it is in a way erasing it in a way, making it more permanent. So the question is, what will be the the more permanent sort of status and of Ukrainians in Poland and elsewhere in the European Union. Go ahead.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for the study. I think it's very important for us to better understand the situation and how we can improve programs and response to support refugees. My name is François Cana. I work with UNHCR. So I have a few questions. That's 4 of them. I don't know if I should start with one and then maybe.
You can state all 4, and then I think I think you can take them.
Okay. The first one, I was interested by your point on the profile of refugees in terms of their education, professional experience in Ukraine, and the needs of the labor market in Poland. I'm asking for 2 reasons. One is how can we better support refugees accessing employment in Poland, which I agree with you is really key for them to be able to stay on their feet and stay here in a dignified manner. I'm also curious to know to what extent economical needs of countries affect also their response to refugees inflows. The second question is on xenophobia. During your research, did you identify any signs that the very positive reception of refugees is changing? And you have any recommendation in terms of indicators that we should monitor moving forward that could indicate such a shift? I mean, I'm asking because I've been in many different contexts where we do see that shift after a few months, a few years, that changes. But curious to see how that could apply in the Poland national context. Third question is on methodology. I was wondering if you did manage to capture some views of minority groups, and if those had, if you observe some divergence, maybe with the majority or the average trends. I mean, here maybe just to mention 2, maybe Roma people from Ukraine, maybe older persons. Did you see any distinction in the answers? And my last point, I did take good note in your conclusion. You noted, the importance of local integration moving forward. I'm curious to know if you have some specific, recommendation for policymakers on local integration. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can answer the first and third. In terms of the qualification of refugees, this is the huge problem, especially in the medical professions. And I think this is something that has to be solved probably on macro scale. Already with economic migrants from Ukraine, we had this problem of in our also research among our respondents. We had a few of people not only with tertiary education but mostly professional doctors who had really big problems in getting into employment in Poland. The procedure of notification of diploma and recognition of qualification is very costly and time-consuming. And as you probably are aware of, we are facing huge shortages, not only among doctors, but even more pronounced among nurses. And among nurses, the situation is with the recognition of qualifications even more difficult, especially that in Ukraine, the dominant type of training was in the post-secondary training, while in Poland, in order to be a professional nurse, you need to have university education. So, summing up, we are running into the risk that highly qualified persons, especially that the Ukrainian nurses, which could be working in Polish hospitals, instead will be employed in the long-term informal care sector, serving the needs of Polish elderly, which is also fine, but it's definitely the waste of their competences. Plus, there is a problem of this is not a coincidence that economic migrants in Poland, so this previous population was male dominated because also the demand on the labor market was mostly to the typical male professions, especially in the construction sector. Now there is a problem because the composition, gender composition of refugees is completely different. And I'm not saying that all of these female refugees will face the problem of finding employment, but definitely they cannot take the employment of those, for instance, Ukrainian males who left the country to fight for the Ukrainian independence. So this would be a challenge. And Poland has so far not. So apart from the obvious efforts of our respondents to learn Polish, we do not have such system as, for instance, Germany, which basically screens the refugee and provides the special strategy for matching the qualifications and for recognition of qualifications, which could serve as a good model for maybe copying it into the Polish system, but so far we don't have such an issue. And when it comes to minorities, what we know from our friends who are cooperating with even conducted research last year on Romas in Kraków, they were actually quite let's say disappointed with the approach of Polish authorities, who basically also, let's say, expressed a kind of expectation, yes, that the Polish Roma should take care of Ukrainian Roma refugees, like these were the refugees of the second category, yes, obviously, and of course this is outrageous and should not be done. Actually, I live close to the refugee center in which International Bund is also very much engaged. So the Plaza Center, Plaza shopping mall, and basically my daily observation is that in this refugee center, obviously Ukrainian Roma refugees definitely are quite visible. Yeah? I don't know how to estimate the numbers, but I would say this problem of stigmatization, even in this public discourse, you know, this very unfortunate speech of one of the politicians. Let's not include the name of this politician who was making jokes that some kind of military equipment was robbed by Ukrainian Roma, and that this is fun, yes, because this obviously embodied already a picture that yes, Roma, so some negative attitudes, instead of saying how courageous these people were, that they were able to fight the enemy by stealing the tank, yes. So this we are also witnessing as not only scholars but people who are engaged in helping migrants with this double moral criteria when it comes to the crisis, which is still ongoing on Polish border with Belarus, of course, because this has not disappeared. These people have not disappeared from the problem is still there. The people are still struggling to cross the Polish border, and obviously there are, let's say, good Ukrainian refugees who are welcome, and those who are not necessarily welcome from the Middle East, but also, unfortunately, the minorities such as Roma minority among Ukrainian refugees. These are definitely not so, let's say, they are not so favorably received by Polish authorities. So yeah, the problem is on the table, unfortunately.
I think just add some words about those people who put the answer that they are working on other services of activity in Ukraine. They have worked, and they also have put themselves like individual service workers. So those people, I think, can easily find a job here in Poland. For example, hairdressers or some similar positions. So those people who can work with their hands, actually, who are professionals in these services. But those people who, for example, professionals in education or professionals in medicine, like as Janek mentioned, these people need more serious to be prepared for working in this environment, other environment, and also be recognized as a professional. They have really more serious problems.
Yeah, but when it comes to the historical occupations, we have, for example, in our sample, a significant number of nurses, teachers. These people are absolutely crucial and vital for the Polish economy at the moment. So the key question is, to what extent these people can access these sectors of the economy where they have specialization. As you know, the big problem is all sorts of conditions you need to fulfill to enter a given sector of economy. During the COVID, luckily, there was the bill passed which allowed people, immigrants, without to go through all the certification sort of process, recognition of educational diplomas. So hopefully this will be maintained, and some of the people from the medical sector in Ukraine will be able to enter this medical jobs. So obviously one of the key recommendations would be to maintain some of this legal sort of provisions that allow easier access for specialists to some specialist sort of sectors. And to use the human potential that we've got, which is very clear in our research. And in this way, the economic needs should be matched. If they are matched, then it's better. But I agree with you, it shouldn't be the driving force. And we had this, for example, a lot of questions that Austrians have in their questionnaires, because we kind of collaborated, but yet have different questionnaires. And they had a lot of questions concerning jobs in the nursing sort of sector, which for us was kind of, for me clearly, it was how you gauge direct your research even to fulfill this sort of economic needs. So I think we have to be critical about it and see these places. When it comes to questions about minorities, we didn't have ethnicity question in our research. We have, when it comes to diversity, we have this religious diversity, but it's not also as deep as I would like it to be, for example, because we have just Orthodox Church, we do not have different patriarchies. But this was a decision we had to make. We have too many questions anyway in this questionnaire, so for some important reasons, we decided not to have these questions, and yet the issues are known, and we had questions about the feeling of safety and why are you feeling unsafe, and we had in the possibilities of answers racism, discrimination, problems with local Polish people, and the highest was actually fear of other nationalities, or actually other accumulated, otherwise it was just 1%. So you could see that it is at least at this moment, and it's marginal, we believe. But when it comes to, if you, I think it has to do especially with the situation of minorities. But our research did not direct the Roma people, for example, from Ukraine coming to Poland. So I think if we were just doing research on them, our answers could be different. But we were trying to get as big diversity as possible, but ethnicity was not sort of the key priority in our research. So.
Thank you for those questions.
Yeah,
Maybe an organizational point as well before your question, Aneta. How much more time and space do we have here?
15 minutes.
About 10-15 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Well.
Okay, thank you. I'm Aneta Krzyworzek. I am the coordinator of Multicultural Center. Just to comment and precise some things. In fact, to visualize how need is needed, how many people will help, we can just say that with our data on the 1st of July, we had more than 1,100 people. 100,000 people, more than. It was a month ago already collected. So, and today you had a chance to see the queue to our warehouse. It was, I think, quite impressive. So they have still needs, and even they have money from UNHCR. We can just imagine how cost of life in Poland are so expensive now. So, secondly, what Jan has said, we are, as an international group Polska, we are not involved in the shelter of refugees. We are just only operator of Szafa Dobra. And thirdly, about the education situation. Today, 2 hours before this meeting, we had this Ukrainian family who couldn't subscribe their children to the school, to the primary school. The director refused this. After this, our colleague called the school again, and they said, "Okay, we will put them on the list." If we had to do this for each family, this is the question to our City Hall, to the education department.
What was the reason why they didn't want to enroll?
Without any reason. So just to comment.
Aneta, if I can, just a question then to you, with the 100,000, is that 100,000 individuals, or is it 100,000 instances of help? Because those could be
individuals. For example, more than 350,000 of different kind of stuff like food, etc., were spread among the people. Yeah, more than 30,000 of medicaments. It was quite strange what you said. Thanks to your data, that they feels more rather in a good condition, because what we observe here, even when we have this social pharmacy, they were in rather bad condition. It was March, April, and half of May. Yeah, so more than 30,000 of medicaments. Quite big amount of people. So it's not the same, but maybe in some declaration, that people need to feel better. I know. Just present themselves that they are better in good condition. We also give the service of administration staff matters about 10,000 people.
Yeah, that's the number of people that visited our migrant info point. So they received this different kind of information and assistance concerning all types of the procedures and also legal aid and also some specialist advice, because at the migrant info point we also have specialists from different NGOs, from the city hall, from different offices. So yeah, we have, well, for now nearly 10,000 people that came to us and asked for this
And
kind of
obviously,
service.
yeah, the next week and then from 2-3 weeks, it's how to find a apartment and how to subscribe to them.
And how to find an apartment and what to do if my term in the apartment where I am currently staying finishes and I have no place to go.
Okay. Well, I think we're probably running short on time. I have a few questions, but maybe I'll limit myself to two very concrete ones. You in a part of your survey, you asked about the determination of refugees to stay in Poland or not, and that was a really interesting, I think, part here. And I wonder if you had a question or a sub-question of the time frame. So was it that they were determined to stay for the next X number of months, or a year or 5 years? Was there a time frame?
No, there was no time frame. This was actually because we contacted it with the University of Vienna, and we had to adapt their questionnaire. So yeah, this is the obvious limitation. But I would guess that in this very early phase of adaptation, it's not so relevant, because still the uncertainty is a dominant approach. So I would, yeah, but you are right. Probably the next round of such survey done in autumn definitely needs to get a more refined cafeteria on this. Yeah, so we, in order to include some other, you know, staying for 1 year, staying for 2 years, something like that.
And my last question, just on the demographics, because you had mentioned the age range of the adult respondents. Is there any data from your survey or any other data that would tell us about the demographics of the children?
That's why we haven't shown it, because we need to work on it. Yeah, but we have,
Will you make these slides available?
What?
Will these slides be available?
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea that we will have soon the full report on this. So
Yeah, but the slides we can make it available right now.
And when it comes to this type of age structure, I think the PESEL data available online is a good source, because and it will tell you the whole country sort of the situation,
which could be instructive for education purposes. Come the fall. Okay. I'm looking around the room.
Can I get the 2-minute question? The last thing?
You can have the 2 minutes.
Yes, you can.
So what, if the total, if we think the total was 2 million and the PESEL total is 1.2, what do we think accounts for that discrepancy? Are those 800,000 children? Why are so many people not even?
Unwillingness to register in a situation when the registration is giving you hardly anything, basically. So, and for the fear that the registration will make a mark in some Polish system, and it will limit the possibilities of accessing some kind of help elsewhere.
Plus there is another option. Many refugees do not understand what actually PESEL is. We had this personal experience with one lady who was deeply, let's say, patriotic, and she felt that applying for PESEL is one step to Polish citizenship, and that means leaving Ukraine, you know, and that. So it took us a lot of time to convince her actually that this is just a number and doesn't really mean anything. So, and a lot of refugees do not have access to such in spite of fantastic work done here, but not in all cities, not in all places, and they simply are scared. Yeah.
But it's also access to the labor market, right? Even though it's not.
You don't need to have it to access the labor
you
market.
don't.
But now they are increasingly pushing because they see that they have reached the limits of actually encouraging people to register. So they are thinking how to make it more obligatory. But you can do jobs without it having it. So some people we have even in our research team, a researcher who left, who knew she was planning to leave, and then she didn't register simply because she's afraid that this may limit her possibilities of accessing some kind of help elsewhere.
But on the other hand, who can't receive medical care without vessel, for example.
Yeah, this was also another thing.
What about kids?
Medical. Yeah, so that basically they will make it increasingly difficult for in many places that you would be in a way pushed to have it, but still some people decide not to have vessel.
Right now, does it need to get to school?
No, concerning the schools, like the system in Poland is that the education is obligatory for everyone until 18 years of age, irrespective of whether you have residence permit, PESEL, whatever, you just have to go to school.
But you can say no, like the library.
Or the schools can say no.
The school should, but then.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that was very rich in data and in discussion, very comprehensive. We're very much looking forward to the report that should be out. I don't know if you can give an indication, but no, we will wait for it.
When we make the commitment, we have to believe. Right?
We will. I will
Within
open that
within
question.
weeks.
Okay.
Holidays is a little bit problematic time. We'll try to make it as fast as possible, and then we'll announce it through the website.
Okay.
And slides will be on the website?
We can share.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Well, in that case, thank you, Olena, Jan, Konrad, for your presentation. Thank you for everyone in the room for your very good questions and participation. And for those you who joined us on Zoom, thank you very much. We see one hand clapping. That's very much appreciated. That just disappeared. Thank you again, and well, looking forward to next time.